This bet we made is a game set in the 1950s, a time of glamour, elegance, and simplicity. Suburban homes stood as the symbol of ideal life. It was an era of cocktail parties filled with laughter, bustling nightclubs, and jazz music. But beneath this polished surface, tensions brewed. The fear of communism cast a shadow over daily life, and in the quiet corners of society, many voices were still unheard. Our story takes place in Montreal, Canada, more specifically in the Clarington Hotel. Now, as someone from the Middle East, I wasn't really aware of how things were in the 1950s, especially in Canada. This was a completely new experience for me. All I knew about the game was from a viral TikTok hinting at the story. I can't really recall the exact words, but it was something along the lines of, "You're a maid in the 1950s with a habit of snooping through guests' belongings. But then you discover you're being stalked." Now this was really a hook. It really intrigued me. It hinted at a murder mystery sort of situation without giving too much information away. And a few days ago, I managed to get my hands on the game and decided to stream it. Streaming it was really fun. And by the way, you can totally follow me on Twitch. I'm really close to affiliate, and it would mean the world to me. I'm literally only 12 followers away. The game opens up with a message warning us that every choice, every action, and even inaction has a consequence. The choices we make as players will determine the fate of others and the environment around us, which honestly felt like a weight on my shoulders, especially since the intro shot begins in the police district, with Sophie Roy, our protagonist, being guided by a police officer. We don't know where we're headed or what's going on, but we do notice that there is literally no color in these scenes. It's all gray. And that usually indicates that no color, no joy. As we walk with the officer, we pass by interrogation rooms where conversations are faintly audible. If you stand close enough to the first room, you can hear a coworker of ours mention cleaning assignments. They explained that they're usually responsible for the third and second floors, but were asked to cover Sophie's fifth floor duties because she had been away for a week. And that Linda, the governess, made the request. Now, I don't really know what a governess is until I googled it. Basically, she's the supervisor. In the room next to it, a detective is questioning someone about being at a certain place called Manny's, dressed as a woman. And the guy being questioned is basically like, "No, it was a joke." But the officer presses harder. It's revealed that the place is known for hosting deviants. Now, that is a word that will come up a lot in this game, and it's usually used to describe a group of people that are unacceptable or deemed unacceptable by societal standards. Our room happens to be right next to this one. We're told to sit down and wait for someone to come in, a detective. A look at Sophie's demeanor makes it clear that we've been waiting a while. Detective Maurice eventually walks in, introducing himself, and we start to learn more about Sophie. Apparently, Sophie has been working at the Clarington Hotel for over a year and is only 21 years old. And Maurice begins asking her about her life. Is she married? Does she have any parents? And Sophie replies that she isn't married and spends most of her time taking care of her sick mother, whom she lives with. She then reveals that it's always been her and her mom. Finally, he gets to the point and asks Sophie to tell him everything that happened, starting with this morning. It is at this point that the camera pans to Sophie's face and we're transported into a different scene. There is a snowstorm raging outside and the camera moves towards the window of the Clarington Hotel and we see Sophie doing her job, cleaning someone's room. Sophie seems to be happy as she vacuums, humming along to cheerful music, which I totally vibed with. The camera then moves to two beds in the room. One clearly needs tidying and has been used, while the other looks almost untouched, with 3 teddy bears on it. The game's title appears on screen as Sophie walks to the radio and turns the music down slightly. We are now in control of Sophie, and we hear her inner dialogue. She mentions that the vacuuming is done and it's time to tidy up the room. From the teasers, we knew that cleaning was part of the gameplay, and let me tell you, I was really excited to try this. As we tidy up, Sophie hums along to the music, clearly enjoying herself. I kind of turned it off because it was a bit too loud, but it was a really fun tune, honestly. I even googled it later and I still listened to it. We then almost instinctively begin snooping around. And we see that there's a suitcase with clothes that you can interact with, and then Sophie immediately comments,
Only menswear. Are you in town for a business trip, maybe?
Now this really shows how she sees things from the start. It's clear that she likes to envision or make up stories about the guests based on their belongings. And the first thing I said about this is that I love being in her mind. Of course, I didn't dive too deeply about her thoughts at this point because this was a very small interaction.
That's a lot of money to owe. Just what did you get yourself involved in?
We read some papers and we realize that the guest that's staying in this room owes money to someone. And that this person actually, or this company, Lucky Coin Financing, has been also harassing his neighbors to get in touch with him. Apparently, it's a proximity thing that they do. Now, as we said, this Lucky Coin Financing company is harassing neighbors as well, who are in close proximity. I really thought about this for a while. I was like, did this really happen before? Like, neighbors will get hassled for your problems? It's also implied that every house on the street got one of these notices about the indebted person. As soon as we exit the room, the number on the door is revealed to be 504. We lock the door and the camera cuts to a scene of Sophie standing with her back to us, waiting for the elevator. There is a ticking of the clock and it's growing louder, inching closer and closer. The camera then cuts again to Sophie's face as she glances at the clock next to her. It's almost as though the suspense is building towards something. And suddenly, we hear a loud slamming noise. Maybe it was a door. But Sophie gasps and looks towards the hallway. Curious, but she seems a bit cautious. She looks to the halls, but the elevator door rings, and then she's reminded to leave. Now, this was an introduction for us that there's something going on the 5th floor. The camera then descends and we get a glimpse of the pipes. Every time I see something like that, I immediately think has to be underground. And yes, indeed, we're in the basement, which appears to be like a break room for the staff. There are 2 co-workers in the basement and they're gossiping about the opening of a mental institution next to the hotel, or as they call it, a nut house. Times were different back then and you could get away with saying a lot of things that are pretty offensive. Sophie is reading a magazine called The Gossiper, which I assume is the fictional equivalent of The Cosmopolitan. One of the co-workers makes a snide comment implying that Sophie would feel right at home in the nut house. Basically, they're mean girls and they dislike Sophie. Why? We don't really know. Bullies really don't need a reason, but that's never an excuse to be mean to someone. Sophie doesn't really seem to care about what they say. The only thing that really catches her attention is the ringing of the phone. On her way to answer it, Sophie overhears 2 characters arguing in the nearby room behind closed doors.
I don't think you're overreacting. This is exactly the kind of behavior Linda warned me about.
She's doing everything she can to break us apart.
It's the games couple, Wendy and Jackie, who are totally my favorite characters. I immediately fell in love with them without even knowing what it's about. They're arguing about Linda, the governess. You know, we haven't really met her yet, but we've heard her being mentioned a few times. Sophie answers the phone in a really hushed whisper tone. Beth asks Sophie to come upstairs to help her with something. And at this point, I really notice something about Sophie. It's either that she's considerate or she's trying to hear what they're saying. You know what I mean? But in my mind, I was like, I'm just gonna go in with this with a good heart. Sophie seems like a good person, so she's probably trying to not disturb the two. It kind of reminds me of how sometimes you just can't help but listen to what people are saying, which is not really always a good habit. It can be helpful sometimes, but it's just socially, it's not really a good habit. We begin to leave the break room and head into the lobby. And I have to say, so far, the game has really caught my attention. And as someone with a neurodivergent brain, I find it really hard to focus on something for so long. I even have been finding it really hard to make this video and narrating it. But the pacing of the game thus far has my full attention and concentration. It feels like watching a really good thriller movie with scenes that build suspense so naturally. But back to Sophie. We reach the ground floor and notice that many things around are just blocking the path. And when interacting with these things, it's always mentioned that Jacques didn't move the luggage. We notice and interact with a newspaper with its first headline being about deviate raids. That word comes up again in the same location mentioned at the start of the game. Manny's Lounge. We find out that Manny's Lounge is in downtown Montreal, and among those people are teachers, school principals, and many others. Basically, what they're doing is trying to push an agenda against anything that is different. Then there's an article about the snowstorm and how dangerous it is, no one should leave their house and make unnecessary journeys. And then we find an article which is interesting. It is about the mental hospital that's opening next to the hotel, which apparently shop owners in the area are against and have been fighting for it not to be built. There's another page that talks about the murder on Valentine's Day. Nothing much is really shared about this murder besides the age and the timing of death, so really nothing that relates to the hotel so far. And on the last page, lists oil, which is something I still do not understand. Is it a hygiene product or is it a enhancing product? But for females, the headline is weird, like stuff such as, "Are those worries bothering your husband? Do you need to keep up with hygiene?" It just didn't make sense. We then noticed that there's a lot of Valentine's themed decorations hanging about. We try to enter the reception hall, but we can't because Sophie does not want to disturb Nicole, who is on duty to clean the reception hall after the ball. We then meet Beth, a charismatic character that seems to like a good gossip session.
So, who's sleeping?
Sleep what?
Which I initially was worried about because I was scared to divulge so much information to her because we didn't really know who she was. So when she asked about what's going on earlier when she called, I didn't feel like telling her at first as I didn't really understand the relationship between the characters. Eventually, Beth turns out to be just alright. She asks us to clean the lobby, particularly there's a vase being knocked over by an angry guest. She says that she could do it herself, but if she leaves the lobby desk, Bernard, who we later find out is the manager of the hotel, is going to be really upset with her.
Bernard emerged from his lair to scold me about procedures and whatnot.
Well, we can't have the beauty of the Clarington Hotel take absence from her throne, can we?
From this point, I could tell that this is something that the staff share, making jokes about their boss. The conversation continues and Sophie heads to the janitor's closet to get the cleaning supplies. As we walk over, though, we see the manager's office wide open, with presumably Bernard yelling at Linda.
Wendy's great at her job. Guests absolutely love her and...
Not just guests, apparently.
Oh, God damn it, Linda! I only like her because guests like her.
Bernard tries to explain to Linda that he keeps Wendy employed because she keeps the guests happy. And Linda seems to have a bone to pick with Wendy. We just don't know why. I think we get to find that out later. We're then interrupted and introduced to Andrew, who seems like another friend of Sophie, similar to how Beth is. He's actually the opposite of Beth. And he talks about the Valentine's ball and how bad it was. I didn't really seem to take to Andrew as much as I did Beth. Personally, I was getting confused with the choices I got with Andrew, but I instantly understood it's a way to introduce a character. They have a small awkwardness between them that I just wasn't feeling really. We hurry and get a mop in particular and begin mopping. While cleaning, we find a film roll. Sophie then heads to Beth and asks about the roll, but Beth is too busy handling an unhappy guest. She does tell us that it belongs to Mr. Spade. Now Sophie's even more curious, so Beth hands her the logbook, to which we try to find the guest's name. And we do find that the guest is staying at room 505. On our way to 505, we see a puddle of water next to the elevator, and we just decide to clean it. You can of course not clean it, but it just wouldn't hurt to clean it. We have small talk with Andrew in the elevator, and he comments on the wet floor being clean, which was nice. So it really took into consideration that we did that. Then the conversation shifts to talking about a mysterious VIP guest on the 6th floor, who literally rented the entire floor. He requested a bucket full of snow, which is what Andrew is holding, and that was just weird. And apparently he has been asking these strange requests often. We reach the 5th floor and immediately head towards 505. But before that, we see our cart, which has a guidebook, which was kind of cute in the art style and stuff, but it had many demands. We also realized that there is full cleaning and partial cleaning, and I think that is something that comes into play with the game's mechanic as well. When we head to 505, we notice that the room is kinda already open, and upon entering, there are film rolls scattered everywhere. But for the most part, this room seems just normal. We put the extra roll on top of the safe where the other rolls were found, and then we walk into the bathroom, which has a red light. Knowing that our protagonist likes to snoop, this is something normal. But when we enter the bathroom, there are pictures hung of Sophie. And guess what the pictures are? it's pictures of Sophie snooping. Yeah, now that really set the tone for me. I was like, what do we do now? It seems like Sophie is being watched by someone. Then what I did was just simply inspect the area. And then you can hear in Sophie's thoughts she should call someone. And then we're given the choice to call either Beth or Andrew. I kind of picked to call Beth. And I think this means that this is the person that's going to help us throughout the game. Upon telling Beth, she finds it amusing. She then warns Sophie about the pictures that it could be incriminating her. She then tells us that there's probably more rolls in the safe, which becomes our highlight in this room. We have to find out the safe code and then access the other rolls to throw them out. Beth becomes our lookout. She says if she sees the guest coming, she'll call us. We discover by snooping that Mr. Spade's name is actually Paul Morgan, and he's been excused from the military in the past. And he also appears to have mental health issues, as he was discharged from a hospital and is taking a lot of medication.
That's rough. How are you supposed to support yourself when no one will give you a job or a place to live?
We find a yarn map hung on the wall which has many places highlighted on it. It is as though he's tracking someone. Sophie thinks it's her.
The oratory. I just went there for the first time and God, it's been years, hasn't it?
Eventually we find out that Paul has also been stalking another person called Lindsay Franklin. We don't know who Lindsay is, but it seems that they were intimate ones, as Sophie believes it could be another girl Paul is stalking or has done this to. We also take notice of the stack of letters. It usually means that there is correspondence between the two. So after some more snooping, we end up finding a paper, specifically a transfer request from 505 to 507. And on this paper, there is a fold. Flipping the paper onto the other side, we find out the combination, which is hospital discharge year, military discharge year, and Lindsay's street address. This is all things that we can find lying around in the room. So as we're snooping around, looking through the room and all that, the phone rings out of nowhere, and it is kind of scary. When we reach to get the phone, it's Beth. And all she wanted actually was just to check in, which gave Sophie a scare and myself a scare. She apologizes for scaring us and asks us about the progress. We end up telling her that we found the combination key and we're just about to open the safe. But first, we have to open the safe. Upon opening the safe, there are two things that stand out. There's a gun on our right and there's a book on the left. I reached for the book first. There's a picture of a woman with her husband, I think, and it's pretty detailed. Basically, this guy is tracking these two people. Their initials are H and M. That's all the information that we know about them. Which time they left, which time they went to this place or that other place, and basically he's just really tracking them down. We then inspect some more, turn the pages and all that. We check the gun, and of course we put it back. But before closing the safe and immediately going to tell Beth about it, I had to get rid of the film rolls, because I did not want to take any chances. We asked Beth to look into their names, that maybe perhaps they're guests staying at the hotel as well. We asked Beth to look into their names. After giving her some info such as their initials being H and M, she then finds that there is a couple named Hector and Marcella Cruz staying at hotel room number 509. At this point in the game, I would love to emphasize that usually any game that has this much information would make me lose interest, but the protagonist Sophie actually makes it so much easier because of the way she thinks. She's not a blank slate. She's a character that already has her own thoughts and her own ideas. And this usually really helps with this kind of situation that we're in, especially because there's so much information and questions that we don't have answers to. When we're asking about Hector and Marcella, Beth tells us that they've checked in last week, in which Sophie was not present, and we also know this because one of her co-workers in the police station did say that they had to fill in for Sophie. So Sophie could not have ever met Marcella and Hector Cruz. So it is at this point that I was, I should really take in this information. Beth then asks Sophie, do you happen to have 509 on your to-do list? And Sophie says, yes, I do. And then we get this really cool shot of Sophie pushing her cart and heading to 509. But as soon as we get to 509, we realize that we don't have our keys, which we left in the break room. We hurry back to the basement level to look for our keys, but we really cannot reach the break room. So what we do is we steal Linda's keys. And upon heading towards the keys, we can see someone looking at us from a peephole. We don't know who this person is, but there's some writing on Linda's office. The words hypocrite B are spelled out very accurately by red lipstick. And above that, there's a note that we read. And upon reading that note, it says, "Meet me at certain place and place and wear that lingerie that I got you." And guess who is it from? It's from Bernard to Linda. Bernard to Linda. And I have to also emphasize that scattered around the hotel, there are these say no to divorce flyers posted by Linda. And I think Bernard is married. So make it make sense, Linda. You're being a hypocritical. So right next to where we found the graffiti in the letter, there is a board where staff puts up their stuff that they want to put up. I don't really know what it's used for. Andrew has his book club thing, and then there's a picture of Wendy receiving an award from Linda. And I think the picture says it all. Linda does not like Wendy at all. It is after this that I sort of begin walking around the area and trying to interact with whatever I can find. There was a picture on the floor, but I wasn't able to pick it up. And when I walked closer to the bathroom, I was able to interact. Well, it was Wendy crying in the bathroom. We tried to console Wendy and be nice to her. She was a little bit rude at first, but you could tell that she's hurt. And there was something very nice about Sophie's character in this scene. You really didn't have to do much for Sophie to be nice to Wendy. She just naturally is nice. Wendy appreciates this and thanks Sophie. And from this interaction, I was able to immediately tell it was Wendy who wrote on the window. After that, I immediately picked up the master key and then started cleaning off the window, just to cover Wendy's traces in case she gets in trouble. I went straight for the elevator to return to room 509, but Beth arrives from the elevator and we have some small talk, in which we talk about Wendy's handiwork. It is revealed at this point that Linda point blank bullies Wendy for no reason. Beth recalls a day where Wendy got a perm done and everyone in the hotel, from clients to staff, complimented her on it, except for Linda, who told her to return home and straighten it out, that it was too distracting for the clientele. Then Beth tells us that she has some business in the maintenance room. I try to head to the elevator, but the game asks if you wish to stay a bit longer or leave. I thought about this, maybe I did miss something. I decided to stay longer, and to my surprise, there is more to do here than I thought. And the first thing that caught my eye was a paper, or a note. Remember the place where we got the notes about Andrew's book club and Wendy winning an award? There was a note addressed to Sophie about Mrs. Beaumont, or as Linda calls her, the divorcee. Apparently, Mrs. Beaumont moved from room 204 to room 507, and she needs more sheets. So Sophie's put in charge of that. Sophie then notes that Mrs. Beaumont is really sweet. Then I was able to interact with the torn picture, which turns out to be a picture of Wendy and the other girls. But of course, Wendy's part is torn out. Sophie notes that this is really cruel. It is also never explained why the group isolated Wendy. Maybe because of her relationship with Jacques, but nothing much really is explained on that. I started snooping around the other lockers to get small glimpses of what everyone's like. And then I stumbled upon Wendy's locker. And guess what I found? The same lipstick used on the graffiti. Upon interacting with it, I immediately threw it out in case lockers get searched and Wendy is found to be the culprit. Then there's really nothing noteworthy of the lockers, so I finish up here and return to the elevator, making my way back to 509. So I couldn't help myself from wandering a little and ended up in room 506, which was already on Sophie's to-do list. It seems like there was a party here and I started cleaning away what's left behind. And I really enjoyed how Sophie took it. She wasn't angry about the mess made, instead she just laughs at the scene. And this is another glimpse to our protagonist's behavior. Sophie has shown time and time again that she is a selfless person. I really wanted to point that out because it's a recurring thing with her interactions throughout the game. We can see that the others around us are going through a hard time, but Sophie remains to be the only one who doesn't really let anything get to her. We then enter room 509 and it seems that this couple is really living it up. More than the party in 506. There are some huge shopping bags and boxes, and we see a receipt for laundry, to which Sophie mentions another character called Rebecca, who is probably the only person doing the entire laundry in the hotel. I immediately begin snooping after this. There is food set out, but no one has eaten yet. There's also expensive champagne set out, and I think that's from last night. And it is at this point that I have to tell you that there's a lot of information in this room. I mean, I think I stayed here for like at least 2 hours, trying to figure out the story of the couple and what's their connection to 505. We see that one of them is sleeping on the couch. This usually signals that there is turmoil in their relationship. We then open a case and see a schedule in which someone is attempting to please the other. This person in the relationship seems to be the more logistical type. Next to this, there's a letter from the person's mother. It is revealed to us that this is Hector Cruz, the husband. His mother states that she is disappointed by him, that he went too far from them to renew their vows. She mentions that Montreal is a very strange destination and suspects that it's the wife's chosen location. And it also seems like the mother is really not approving of this marriage. Perhaps she never really liked Marcella. Though there's a small tidbit mentioned in the letter, and it was about a man looking for Hector. The mother assumes that it's a co-worker, but she's not really sure. She tells the man that Hector is in Montreal and would be back next week. Sophie mentions, "This person is looking for you back in Texas. Was he really just a co-worker?" Now at this point I wasn't really sure who she was referring to, but with time I was hoping it would make sense. We then move to the next item on the table, and it's a paper with expenses titled Montreal Vacation. It seems as though Hector likes to keep track of every penny spent. We then move to the couch where we find a rosary, a Bible, and a picture of the couple. It's a picture of their wedding day. The date is February 14th, 1948. I took that into note in case it's important later. We then enter the main bedroom. And at this point, I just realized that this is a deluxe type of room. It's not a normal room. It could also be a suite. The first thing that sticks out to us is a case of sorts. I immediately pulled out the paper and started reading it. The letter is from Fernie and Wiseman about a privacy breach that occurred on the 25th of September, which Marcella filed. This is something that has to be important, even if we haven't had enough info. But what we know for sure is that Marcella has had her private information breached. And on the same document, there are some strange symbols under some letters. Now, where have we seen this before? We've seen it in 505, on the tickets stuck to the yarn map. I took some mental notes of this because I tend to overthink these things a lot. Quickly, I began cleaning as I snooped, make the bed, clean the roses on the ground. I also interacted with the case, and it's locked, of course. It needs a 4-letter code. Moving around the room, I found a to-read list. It has a book list, I think, and some letters with murder in the end, with some more strange symbols. Next to this is a jewelry box, and it has a receipt of the account being emptied on the 2nd of October, 1958. So this is very recent. And guess whose account it is? It's Marcella's account. Now, I really was thinking about this, and it could be two things. Either she's running away or being blackmailed. At least that's what I'm implying because I don't want to assume the worst. Marcella's really up to something, but we don't really know anything about it. And then I thought of something else. Could she be paying Paul? But for what? Why does he have a gun? Is she planning to get rid of her husband? I didn't want to put my eggs all in one basket, so we just press on for now. On the nightstand, we find a book and a small piece of paper torn from a newspaper that has more strange symbols on it. We still don't know what these symbols are, but after this I interacted with the trash, to clean it. And then I found a torn piece of paper. Immediately the phone began to ring, and this was scary.
Hello? Hello? Beth? Is that you?
And there was no one on the other line. It was just someone breathing. We hung up on the phone, and then Beth explains that Andrew patched a call to 509 moments ago, and Beth believes it might be Mr. Morgan, aka Paul. And for all we know, it might as well be him. We asked Beth to see if Andrew heard anything besides that, and he says that he heard an elevator bell, so he assumed that the caller was one of our clients. Then we start to fill in Beth. Beth then notes that she saw Marcella run out of the hotel not too long after Paul knocked over that vase. We ask her what time it was and she says it was around 10 a.m. And it was around that time also that we heard the loud noise from earlier. Beth also notes that she might be following Paul or sneaking out to meet someone. I didn't really know exactly what to make up of this, but thank God the gun is still in the safe. We don't really know how possible it is for Paul to know that Sophie is in 509. We, however, ask her to make sure that no more calls come to 509. So now we have a lot of information and a lot of questions, but not many answers. The only real lead that we have right now is the torn piece of papers. And I would like to note also that these pieces of paper are actually scattered around the room, which I have to point out is sus because it's scattered in literally every trash can. Was it perhaps scattered so that Mr. Cruz can't read it? Is she hiding it from her husband? After some more snooping and investigating, we finally have all the pieces of the paper together. We form them into one paper, but it's all a code. So we have to kind of translate this code if we want to know what's being said on the paper. Immediately the camera pans to the bedroom, and I have to say this game has amazing cinematography. Basically it was giving us a clue on where to find the code. Now if you remember, we did stumble on the code earlier in 505. It wasn't only in this room. And also one more thing. I found a bottle of Liss oil in Marcella's belongings. I didn't know if it was important or not, but you know, it kind of like gave me some thoughts. Perhaps there's some issues between the two and Marcella's trying to make up for it but back to the code. As I said, I mixed and matched the rest of the code and guessed whatever was remaining. And it spelled out to, I will leave notes in the vent next to your room. Then it immediately cuts to Sophie picking up the phone to call Beth. Beth says that the Cruzes seem to keep secrets from each other and she thinks it's an affair. I thought it would be blackmail from all the things I found. I then explained to Beth that it's probably a blackmail because there's a security breach and an emptied account. Maybe Paul is behind this somehow. We don't really have a lot to go on, but Beth does say something really important. Beth asks if we think Paul is involved in this some way. And there was a choice that maybe Marcella hired Paul. And Beth comments on it that he's pretty lousy at that if that's the case. And this makes sense. Why is he taking pictures of Sophie when she's never been in the couple's room? Why is he stalking the couple? He's definitely following the wrong target if he's hired by Marcella. We hang up from our conversation with Beth and the camera pans to the door and we start looking for the vent. But as soon as we get out of the room, we hear strange sounds, kissing sounds basically, and they're coming from 506. But guess who it is? It's Bernard and Linda. We don't really interrupt their little meetup, but we do overhear Linda mentioning Wendy again and asking Bernard if he's been to the women's locker. He seems really confused by this and asking her, why would I be there? And then we get an achievement, something along the lines of Wendy does not get fired. This means that we did really good by hiding the evidence of what Wendy did and wiping the graffiti. We end up finding the vent near the end of the hall, but we can't seem to get it open. We need a screwdriver. There's a janitor's closet nearby and we find a cute W+J. And of course, it's Wendy and Jacques. Sophie comments that these two are meant to be together, and I agree. We then find a letter, torn into pieces. We try to piece the pieces together and it's a note from Linda to Eugene. Eugene is the maintenance guy. Eugene is usually the guy for any electrical issues, windows broken, doors, locks, safe combination. He had it all. And it seems that Linda has asked Eugene to go into Bernard's office and fix the window. We then find a piece of newspaper article torn, and it's about the mental hospital being built. Apparently, William Weston, manager of the Weston's department store, is very much against it and has a lot of hurtful words to describe it. And this seems important to Eugene because we find out that there's a letter beside this. Someone named Joyce has sent him a letter. And she says that a friend and a friend of hers has spoken to her hairdresser who heard from her sister-in-law that works for the mayor. Like it's a lot of, I heard from this person, from that person, and this person. Basically, it's about the mental hospital being built. But there's really important information here. It is mentioned that Denise would be getting the health she needs. Denise, as we later find out, is Eugene's daughter. We find a picture of them together pinned on the board. And Sophie mentions how Eugene seems like a great father. We then take a look at the toolbox and there is no screwdriver. Now this is an issue. But Sophie notes that Eugene is headed to Bernard's office to fix the window anyway, so perhaps we can meet him there. We begin walking towards the elevator, and guess who's with us on the elevator? Bernard. I was kind of shocked, like it was a jump scare. And it's pretty obvious that he doesn't know anything about Sophie. He messes up her name, and he tells her not to take any weeks off because she took care of her sister, but it was actually her mother. Then we get two choices. It's either we say we need a screwdriver, or we lie and we say we're on break. Now, this is the first time the game introduced us to lying, and we get a warning message about it too. That lying can be situational, but you can also get caught. I didn't like that we didn't have any other excuse besides that, which kinda sucks. But the game mechanic is still great. We reach the manager's office and Beth shows up behind us, asking us what we're up to. And we explain to her. Upon entering the office with Beth as our lookout, the window is wide open and there's snow coming through. The ground is wet and there is a note on the floor. And the screwdriver is also left behind. The first thing that came to my mind is to check the letter, because we never know what we might mess up. The letter is from Bernard, addressed to Weston's department store owner, William, who, if you remember from the janitor's closet, is very much against building the mental hospital. The letter is basically saying, I'll join you in this fight and we'll do this together and we'll stop this building. And there are some pretty angry notes written by Eugene. So what I decided to do is, it seems like this letter has not been sent and I don't want to get Eugene fired. So I tossed away the letter, cleaned up the floor, picked up the screwdriver, and shut the window. In this way, Eugene is going to stay safe and that letter will never reach William. Then I went through the file cabinet and it's very interesting. The guest on the 6th floor has insane demands and none of them make sense at all. But I do have a strong theory of who it is. Let's just say he has ties to the movie industry. We then move to Bernard's desk and there's another unsent letter sitting on the top of the typewriter. Bernard is writing a very weird check-in letter for his brother Raymond. It is also revealed that Raymond is more laid back with management in the hotel. It wasn't so uptight. The hotel was more open to others, and there was even an article that we find about this. A husband and his wife used to go to the hotel every anniversary and have stopped going now for a few years because of unsavory people. And I think they meant Bernard. There is also another thing that we need to talk about. Raymond is what Bernard calls a deviant. Basically, put it simply, Raymond likes men. He's not a freak or a weirdo. He just has a different orientation. We can tell what kind of person Bernard is, and no wonder he gets along really well with Linda. We leave the office and see that Bernard is arguing with Beth. Beth is trying to stall him, but he notices us and asks what we're doing in his office. And we just say we weren't there, we just saw the door opening and we closed it. And this is also another lie. He gets mad about us being on this floor because the cleaning staff is not supposed to be here. The lobby, basically. I kind of got annoyed by that because we didn't get the option to say, but we're on break. It was either screwdriver or someone left the door open. Both options kind of scared me, so I just went for the lying route. We look at Beth and she covers for us and we mouth a very sorry to her. It does become worse in the office because we can overhear him yelling at her, but we have a job to do. We head back to the 5th floor and make our way through the hall to check the vent again. But I had to stop by 508 to check if Linda is still there. She's not. And we're supposed to also clean the room. It looks like these two had a very intimate time. Romantical, let's say. We clean up after them and we see a lot of tissues on the floor. And I do vaguely remember passing by this room before and hearing Linda cry. So maybe there is turmoil between Bernard and Linda as well. But I don't think these two actually should be together. Bernard is clearly using Linda, and Linda's trying to appease a man who's married. So she's also being a hypocrite. Eventually, we head back to the vent and open it, and we find another note. This really excites me. We begin to decipher the new note, and it says, "Meet me tonight in my room. Michael will be sleeping. We need to discuss our plan." We immediately call Beth and check up on her, and the first thing she says is, "Hello, Bean," which I found to be really adorable. This interaction is really cute. It is at this point that I really started loving what's happening between Sophie and Beth, whether it's a friendship or more. We start apologizing to her. She says that she's fine, but she wants to know what we found. We told her what we found, and it was another note, and we told her what the note was about. Beth then comments that there's probably another husband, but Sophie's not sure. But then Beth tells us that there is a Michael in 507. Sophie realizes that this is Mrs. Beaumont and her son, Michael, because she remembers bringing extra sheets for him so he can build the fort. I also want to point out that these notes had an M, or the letter M, ending in every note. And I think M is Marcella. So it looks like Marcella is meeting with Mrs. Beaumont. But what is their plan? So we ask Beth to make sure that there's no one in the room. What she does is basically she calls from the lobby or the reception, and the phone rings in the next room. And the phone rings in the nearby room. We hear that no one picks it up, so it's all clear. We head to room 507 and figure out what's going on there. We enter 507 and it looks like a mess, but it's not on our to-do list, and this is important. So we don't clean it. We can inspect the room, but we shouldn't clean it. We can only really snoop. The first thing I reached out to is a family picture above the toilet. It's Mrs. Beaumont, her son, their dog, and a burned face of his father, or her ex-husband rather. Since we remember from the note that Linda calls Mrs. Beaumont the divorcee. And then next to those pictures, there's a set of rings, but I didn't know who they belong to. Then I moved on to the sink and there was a note. The note is written in French, and from reading it, it's 100% threatening. It's from her ex-husband, and it's quite horrible. We leave the bathroom and then find 2 sets of cups with champagne. But these 2 cups have 2 lipstick stains on them, and each lipstick stain is a different color. This confirms that Marcella and Mrs. Beaumont have been meeting. And it is at this point I was theorizing. What if Beth was right? There is an affair. What if Marcella and Mrs. Beaumont are lovers? And Paul is hired by one of the husbands to find out about their relationship. But this is as far as I went. I did not want to theorize so much. I want to see it play out some more. There's still some unanswered questions. There's also a card next to the cups we found. It has the number 1824 highlighted, and the timings and date did not make sense for me. We then find the fort made by Michael, and we can see a note that he's written, confused about what's going on with his father and mother. It was sad to read this, to be honest, and Sophie also sympathizes with Michael. Then we find a postcard with a letter, and it seems as though it is sent from Marcella because it is signed M. She says that she cannot wait to see Mrs. Beaumont and Michael. She states that they have been on the train for 2 days now, and this also means that Mrs. Beaumont was here first. Let me tell you why. If you remember the transfer request from 204 to 507, that was not a coincidence. Mrs. Beaumont was here before Mrs. and Mr. Cruz. In fact, given that Sophie remembers them from the week before she took her leave. So Marcella then instructs Mrs. Beaumont to not speak to her when she sees her in the hotel until they can find a way to talk to each other. So it appears that they've been contacting each other before all of this. Perhaps there's a backstory or history between the two that we're not really aware of yet. We then notice a cereal box at the drawing competition. Clearly, little Michael has been trying to get into this competition. I do remember as a kid that we had these kind of stuff, but I don't know if it's around these days. We then find a letter on the bedstand, and it's from an attorney's firm. Clearly, Luis, the husband, has been abusing Anne, who is also Mrs. Beaumont, and that they are living in Quebec, where abuse is not grounds for divorce. He advises her to no longer antagonize her husband and not to forget to be at court at 11 a.m. on the 20th. He also very kindly reminds Anne to pay him as well. Now, from what we see here, it seems like Anne is pretty much in hot waters. Then we move on to another thing on the bed, which is a cat collar with the name Greta on it. We find a letter from December 26, 1945, which is around 14 years ago. And it's a letter from Marcella to Anne, talking about how hot it is in Texas and how she misses Montreal. She asks Anne how she's doing, and she also mentions that she'll be back in Montreal by the 8th of January. Perhaps these two were meeting from time to time. I didn't really get it. But she also mentioned that there's black cat hairs all around her clothes. This is important later. Trust me, because I spent hours trying to figure out why. We then find another paper, and it's probably from Anne to Marcella. She doesn't seem to like what she writes, scratching out words and tossing away the paper. And we stumble upon another paper. It's one of those send this or you're doomed kind of paper. It's kind of hilarious. It's about the number 3 and how you're supposed to make 33 copies of the letter and send them, or else you will be cursed. But if you do, you will experience great joy within 3 days. This was really funny. But next to it, on the bedstand, we find a card addressed to Sophie from Anne. She thanks her for bringing extra sheets for Michael and left her a tip as well. Sophie was really happy about this, but we cannot touch anything here, so we just leave it. This also shows us Anne's character, or at least a glimpse of her character. We then snoop back around. I went back to the bathroom because I feel like I missed something, and I found a matchstick from the White Cat, which is a bar that Anne probably hangs out in. And also I find a picture above the fireplace. It's a group of girls, like with nuns in the background. We can interact with this frame and then open it from the back, and it gives us the name of the place and the date this was taken. So the picture was taken in Mount Royal College, Montreal, 1947. I'm guessing this is where they met, but the dates don't really add up. It could be where they met, but not the time that they met in, because there are letters that we find from 1945. But I shelved that for the time being. There's still things that we need to snoop around for. We find a letter from Michael's school that they're sending books and have successfully finished processing the request to withdraw him from the school. It doesn't seem to relate too much, but probably add a little bit to the story. Anne is either running away from her husband or trying to move away with Michael. And I didn't notice before, but we did find something. It's a key of sorts. And I remembered that there's a box inside the suitcase of clothes laid out on the bed, and the key fits right in. But we're missing another key. Sophie exclaims that there's another key that she's seen like that before, but she doesn't remember where. And this part, trust me, I totally forgot where I saw this, and I spent hours searching every room and every place to remember where. But before I even set out to search it, I opened the drawer and found a book, also written by Bridget Boswell, and it's called Adam or Eve. It's a story about a woman who falls in love with another woman. It's a forbidden type of love story. Very fitting for Marcella and Anne. And after that, I began searching all the rooms all over again. And guess what I found in Paul's room? I found a book titled And They Were Roommates. Now this cracked me up. The whole theme of this game has become And They Were Roommates. I cannot stop saying it now. Every time I see it, I'm like, And They Were Roommates. It is also written by the same writer, Bridget Boswell. Also in this room we find the second key, but it's on Marcella's neck from the pictures. Immediately, the game cuts to a scene of Sophie calling Beth, and Beth calls her Bean again, which is cute. I repeat, this is really cute. After that, Beth gets to the point. She has something to tell us. She tells us that Paul and Hector Cruz had a fight yesterday evening. Jacques saw them and had to even interfere to stop them from fighting. And guess what it's about? It's about an affair. And it seems like Beth thinks she's right, which she is, but the affair is not between Paul and Marcella. The affair is between Marcella and Anne. We tell Beth about the key dilemma, and she tells us to bring a bag of plaster and wax. We then find the bag of plaster at the end of the hallway near the janitor's closet and pick it up. Then we begin making our way to the basement, because apparently Rebecca, who works in the laundry, hoards a lot of candles, and that's where we can get our wax. Upon arriving, I interacted with another one of those boards and found a note from the new maid, Carol, which Sophie notes that she seems really sweet. She would talk to her if she wasn't so bad around new people. Perhaps the two could be friends. We also see very friendly notes from the rest of the staff, which is kind of surprising. We head over near Linda's office because if you remember, we stole her master keys. But it seems that there's a conversation going on between the two. The topic of discussion? Eugene. We overhear the comment about the window and get another STEAM achievement. Eugene won't be fired after all. But there's also a comment made about someone named Sylvie by Bernard. He's complaining about this odd maid named Sylvie. Then Linda corrects him and tells him it's Sophie, and that Sophie is well liked and is a good girl. They then continue kissing or whatever, and we get back to business. We head for Rebecca's locker, and there are more demands from the guy on the 6th floor. Guess who wrote them? Bobby, the cook. Bobby is upset that the guy keeps requesting things off the menu, and every night he barges in the kitchen as if it was his home, asking for food for the dogs. Expensive food as well. We then find another note from Bobby, and he's complaining about the kitchen being out of power. Because of the power outage, he needs candles, and that Rebecca has a stash of candles. We take that into note and hurry to find it. But before we continue further, I had to return the master key that belongs to Linda. And after doing that, we head back to the break room, which is now opened, and we get our own keys. But we overhear Wendy and Jacques, but this time it's not good. Wendy wants Jacques to apologize, but he doesn't feel like that because he didn't do anything wrong. She then tries to leave. He stops her and asks for his mother's ring. So then Wendy leaves and Jacques stays behind, crying. So I'm pretty much frustrated at this. I feel as though I missed something or I did something wrong. And then I searched for it online, and apparently there's a reason. If you leave the graffiti and Bernard's note for Linda, but get rid of the lipstick, Jacques and Wendy never break up. In fact, Jacques apologizes to Wendy and they make up. This really made me sad, but I continued and pushed forward. I found Andrew's book club flyer, and then when I turned it around, it seems like people were gossiping about the VIP on the 6th floor, that apparently he's a famous director. We then snoop around some more and find magazines. Sophie loves these. And then we find notes about Tupperware, and then a paper used as a game for staff. There's a numbers game and I didn't really get it. But behind the paper is actually a notice to all employees, and it's about someone snooping around the guests' belongings. If this person does not come forward, there will be some severe consequences to all the employees. Eventually, I make my way to the laundry room and search for the candles. We found a note from Eugene to Rebecca complaining about the pipes being completely frozen and that he had this issue last winter as well, so there's nothing he can do to help with the laundry machines. He also complains about how Bernard doesn't really care. He only cares about the appearance of the hotel, but nothing that's inside. We then move further into the room and we find a movie script. Now, this adds more to the theory of the VIP guest being a director. There's also a note hung by Rebecca, I think, making a list of things she finds and perhaps things that she's given back. Sort of like a lost and found, I would assume. The scratched off items are perhaps items that have been returned, and the other items are items that are still lost. We then find the candles after a lot of searching and head back to the break room to meet with Beth, who was already waiting for us outside. There's a cool shot of the two discussing their mission as they walk, which was kind of epic. Beth then shows us that we will use the plaster and the wax to create a replica of the key. And it takes some time, so we spend a lot of time chatting. There's a lot of romantical tension between the two that I really enjoyed. And I think this is the point where the game is telling us that Beth is going to be a love interest. And also, I think Andrew would have been the love interest instead if we picked him. But I don't know because I did not pick Andrew. We then head back to room 507 as fast as we can. But we have to really be super careful about turning the key because this key might actually break. Thankfully, I made sure to turn it very slowly and open the chest. Now, let me just say this chest is very important because the first paper is literally a puzzle. 5 letters. One is actually the name of the black cat Greta. And I'm saying this now because it took me 3 hours to find that out. The answer was actually Greta the cat. And let me tell you why. Because the question is like, unlike my favorite bar, this one is black. Her favorite bar is the white cat. So this whole time I was like trying to find what it meant. And then I realized it was Greta. Greta's had black hairs on Marcella's clothes. The second one is an alliterative name, which is sort of like 2 names with the same initials, like Pow Pow or Molly Morris, something like that. And apparently we need to take the first 2 letters from the first name and the last 2 letters from the second name. But this is all done later. I had to explain it now because I overcomplicated it in my playthrough and wasted hours trying to find the answers. Not to say that the puzzle is hard, but I kept overcomplicating it for myself. The next note is from Marcella to Anne about giving her soup and that she hopes that Anne is doing well after that. Next thing we see is a movie invitation from Marcella to Anne. Then a letter from Marcella and a sentence written with code that says, "All I do is look at your lips and imagine kissing you. I can't wait to see you tonight." It seems as though these letters were how they communicated in college to avoid scrutiny from the world around them. I really have to say I felt really bad for these two. They had everything stacked up against them to this day. The letter after this one is a bit more heartfelt. It's from Marcella to Anne again. In 1946, she reminds her of a song sung by Doris Day and how it takes her back. She expresses how she feels about her, how she loves her, and how she misses her. Their love appears quite pure and genuine, but of course they cannot tell anyone about it. We find a cute picture of the two and then a letter of Marcella checking in with Anne a year later, in 1947. She apologizes for not being able to write back and basically tells her that there's no way that these two can be together, thus ending the relationship. We then call Beth to fill her in and ask for help with the puzzle. But I will save you the struggle of me spending 2 hours trying to figure out that it's Greta. I kinda overcomplicated it for myself because that's how my brain works. Eventually I realized that the answers were Greta and Doris. Then I head back to 509 to open the case. Now to open the case we need the first 2 letters of the first word and the last 2 letters of the second word. Greta, we take G and R. and Doris, we take I and S. The case opens and we're going to pretend that I did not spend 3 hours trying to figure out Greta was the answer. After it opens, we realize that it's a typewriter case, but there are letters above it. We realize that Bridget is indeed the writer Marcella. If you remember the books that we found, they were all signed by Bridget, and the publishing place was F&W. Well, F&W was from the same place that Marcella had her security breach. So it all leads to Marcella being the writer of these books. And this is confirmed when we open the case. These are basically all letters from Anne and Paul. We first start with the letters from Anne. Anne says that she recognized their story written in these books. Anne also tells Marcella how heartbroken she was, how angry and confused about the nature of their feelings. She wondered for years if it was really love between the two, but is happy to see her achieve her dream and become a writer. We then get another letter from Anne to Marcella comparing the behavior of the husbands each now have. She's worried about Michael being hurt and is thinking about unaliving her husband. She also mentions having a dream of the two being together. She also mentioned having a dream of Marcella as a man, I think, and Anne as the woman, or the other way around, and that they were in love with each other, and she wishes if she could meet Marcella in Montreal. I have to say, I don't really think Anne is going to unalive her husband, but I think she's in a very tough situation, and it really shows how horrible he is to her. The next letter is from Paul. Paul states that he is a big fan of Marcella, and while being in his psychiatric hospital for 10 years because he has a lot of panic attacks, the only thing that really got him through was Marcella's books. And he figures out that Bridget is Marcella because from the security breach, it turns out that Paul is the guy who found Marcella's info. Then it is somehow explained that Marcella actually hired Paul, but we're not aware for what. There is also another letter from Anne, but this one is quite old. And it's about the notes and the secret language that they used in class. When we find the last letter, and of course it's from Anne, she tells Marcella that it's time for her to be known as the writer of these great books. Maybe things would be better for them if they at least lived in places like New York and California. We now understand that Marcella has come here under the pretense of celebrating her wedding anniversary with Hector, but it was all a plan to meet Anne again. We call Beth and fill her in on the entire story. The two then wonder if they're here to meet for a few days or there's something more to it. Beth says that she may be able to find out more because there's a letter that just arrived for Anne. We talk about the legality of it, but at this point, Beth just opens it anyway. Now the suspense is really there. So it's 3 tickets and a pamphlet for tourism in California. Now, if I'm guessing, I think this would be for Marcella, Anne, and Michael, because those would be the 3 I would pick. There's no way it's going to be Marcella, Anne, and Paul, or Marcella, Hector, and Anne, because Michael is always going to be with Anne. And I think their plan is to run away. Beth then asks about Paul. How does Paul fit in all of this? We explain to her that he's a fan and has become a little bit too obsessed with Marcella's stories. He even took on this identity, calling himself Mr. Spade. Well, Beth and Sophie then make plans to weather out the snowstorm together. Perhaps they'll build a fort in the bar below or find a room to stay in. They spend some more time talking cutely to each other, which was really cute, like I always say. Whenever these two are together, it's just adorable. Sophie then gets to finish the rest of her task and we leave the room. Upon leaving though, we keep hearing the sound of the elevator bell ringing over and over and over. As we go to check it out, there is a trail of some red spots. A scene plays and we find that the elevator is stuck on an unalived body. Now I can't show this scene, but I will try to narrate it. It's basically Mr. Cruz. And then we find a note which has some stains on it. It's a life insurance policy written to Marcella, and the date of the commencement is February 6th, 1958. So very recently. There's also another letter. It's from February 16th, which I believe is the date of today. And it's about the fight between Paul and Mr. Cruz. So it's kind of getting strange at this point. We go and check the trail, and I have to say, at the moment, everything is leading back to Paul. But we had to check the trail out anyways. And then the power goes out. As we walk over to the scene, there's a puddle of liquid. Let's just say it's where the scene happened. There's also an ice pick on the floor, and I think this is the item that was used. We then find also 2 notes. A small notebook, which is a journal that turns out to be belonging to Paul, and that he's been helping Marcella out with a plan. But the notes here put him also as a suspect. But I would like to emphasize that we have 4 total suspects, not 3. Marcella, Anne, and Paul are the first three suspects. All their items are scattered around the ice machine where the scene happened. There's Paul's notes, his camera, and there is Marcella's pearls and Anne's cigarette holder. It's also explained from the notes that Paul was taking pictures of Sophie and the others because he had to pass time while Marcella was away. Also in another note, Marcella has been asking Paul to let go of his alternate ego, Mr. Spade, for a while now, but he hasn't been listening. He's become too obsessed with it, and it seems that Paul has been hiding out in this area to see if there is any suspicious movement, keeping his camera always ready. We also find out that Anne and Marcella met at 9:45 this morning, while Sophie was cleaning room 504, and Paul left in a hurry. He didn't finish writing his notes. I think it's at this point that I was thinking maybe it is Paul, but I kept forgetting that Paul actually went outside and Marcella followed him later. This could be also me getting my times mixed up. But let's talk about the items scattered around. The camera and the notes and the pearls and the cigarette holder. This makes all three of them suspects. Now we really have to delve into the motive of these three. Why would Marcella do what is done to Mr. Cruz? Does she need the life insurance so she could live out with Anne? Did Anne perhaps do this because Hector was in the way of their happiness and she unalived him for the sake of Marcella? Maybe Paul was attacked by Mr. Cruz again and fought back this time. We don't know anything for sure, but we need to open the electrical box and turn the power back on. And guess what? It's locked. And the only thing that seems to fit it is an ice pick, which is, the weapon. We head back to the scene, pick up the ice pick, which, as you know, we think is the weapon, then head back to the electrical box. Opening it, we see instructions set by Eugene on how to use the amps and replace them. But also, there is like these safe codes, or half of the safe codes. And let me tell you, I did not pay attention to this on my first playthrough, and I'm not going to tell you what happened on my first playthrough now, because I fixed that, and I'm going to tell you what happened on my best playthrough. I will explain later. But let's get back to the amps for now. We need to find the correct amps and slot them into the power to turn them back on. We also take codes from room 509, of which the rest of it may be found in the laundry room in the lost and found items. Now, I did not find this, but I had to Google it later, and I found it. So after this, I headed back to Marcella's room and entered the code. Upon opening it, there are some notes and a gun. The note is addressed to Mr. Cruz, signed by SW. Now, SW is a name that we've seen before, but behind this note, there's a news article. Now, the note is a threatening note. Basically, this person wants to unalive Mr. Cruz. Behind the note, there is a news article, or a piece of a news article. It's about a man who unalived his family and started a fire in his house, also unaliving his 3 children in the process. Then we see a scene of Sophie remembering someone who fits this description. 3 singed teddy bears laid on the bed, a debt from Lucky Coin Financing. Ladies and gentlemen, our 4th suspect, room 504. Now this was a twist. I wish I got this on my first run, but let's just continue. This was the biggest twist in the game. The game did such a good job to hide the identity of the guy in 504, and now I know why. The guy is really thorough. He made sure that nothing would lead back to him, except for the one thing he could not get his hands on, which is the threatening note. Of course, that was in the safe. He couldn't get his hands on that. Now it is at this point, if you help Marcella and Anne, Paul gets the blame for it all. So what I did was, I ensured that there would be nothing incriminating to any of these 3 people. Because let's not forget, these 3 people are labeled deviants. And the moment their things are searched or their belongings are looked into, and get blamed for the unalivement of Mr. Cruz. You also have to remember that Paul was in love with a man named Lindsay and has been in a mental hospital for 10 years. He's probably going to get treated as the unaliver. You know what I mean? Anne is a divorcee who is in love with another woman. Marcella has emptied her account and has her life insurance on her husband's body. All of these 3 would immediately become murder suspects, but there is hope. You can intervene. You can change that. Also, let me bring to your attention that there are many endings to this game. I unlocked most of them, but I would like to talk the ending that really suited me the best. Now, when we think about Sophie, Sophie almost knows these people. She understands what they have to go through. She's also very smart, and she knows that none of these 3 people are unalivers. But room 504 is the clearest suspect of this situation. He has been threatening Mr. Cruz and has been harassed by Mr. Cruz's company several times. He is also the person who has unalived his entire family, including the children in the house. He probably set up this entire scene to make it look as though these three scrutinized characters are the killers, or at least one or two of them. Now, I was thinking about this, and would Sophie save the characters? I think Sophie would try to do what she can do without really getting herself hurt, but it's giving the player the choice. Would you, as the player, save them? Yes, I would. Okay, so after this, I went and made sure to remove everything that linked these three to each other and to what happened to Mr. Cruz. And this is what happened. We had to move the body blocking the way to get to the elevator. And after that, we headed to the lobby, where the power seems to be out as well. There is no one around and we make the call. Sophie says that there's been an accident or a murder and the police needs to get here ASAP. We then meet with Beth, who has a lot to say, which honestly would have really helped if we were able to talk to her sooner, because at this point you're locked into the choices you made. Beth tells us about her and how she is like Anne and Marcella, and that she's also seen Anne in the White Cat. It's sort of like a ladies only bar that Anne frequents in, and so does Beth. Beth advises Sophie to be careful about what she says about our three people, especially Anne and Marcella. Anything about their relationship or preferences can be used to pin it on them. The police have already shown this if we recall the interrogation room from the start. Remember the Manny's bar or lounge situation? We then return to the present moment where the detective is asking us what happened. We lie about certain information to hide the involvement of Marcella, Anne, and Paul, but steer the detective towards the guests staying at 504 SW. Then the detective hints that there's someone meddling into the guests' belongings. So it's at this point, if you've lied too many times, it doesn't end up good for Sophie. But if you lied just enough, it ends in the best possible way. At least that's how I see it, because I spent 2 hours trying to get the ending that I wanted. I made sure to thoroughly clean Marcella and Paul's rooms and throw away anything that has evidence linking them to Anne, because Anne has the least amount of evidence. She just has the stack of letters that you can just throw out. We then tell the detective when he asks about Marcella that she's a sweet lady and Paul is peaceful, despite the fight that happened between him and Mr. Cruz. We also lie about Mr. Cruz telling us about the guy in 504. Of course, the detective thinks that he should look into it, but it's not really a thing. It doesn't seem like it's important or something. He really brushed it off and says he'll look into it later, and he gets irritated because every time he asks us something, there's things missing or someone has been messing with the scene. After this, he tells us to leave, and we do just that. We return to the hotel a week later, and Sophie comments that Bernard asked to see her and that he sounded dejected. Boo-hoo. I thought, okay, this is great. We arrive at the hotel and the newspaper says that the situation was actually solved. It was SW indeed, and he was identified as the unaliver of Mr. Cruz, and that the hotel management has received some big hits. As we go to Bernard's office, Beth is leaving the office really angrily and says that she's been fired, then says that she already has another job in mind at a bar. We enter right after her. He complains about the staff and the state of the hotel, and then talks about Sophie. He says that Sophie has been a great worker and he would like her to start cleaning the 5th floor immediately, even after everything that happened, which was really weird. And you can see in Sophie's face, she's like, I just came back from there and it was horrible, you know, given that what happened. And then we're giving a choice. Do we quit or do we go to clean the room? I honestly chose to quit, because if there's something that Sophie should have a strong say in, it's this, and this is the right time to speak up. He appears to be unfazed and asks us to leave, which we do, and then we meet up with Beth. We then explore the romance route with Beth, and the two share a kiss. You can also not kiss her, but why wouldn't you? It is at this point that the police walk into the hotel, and we see them from above. Sophie says she knows what's about to go down, and then we head down with Beth. Sophie is then arrested for obstruction of justice, and Beth is really upset. We then see the endings play out, and the first ending is actually with Paul. Actually, it's not with Paul. Upon editing, I saw that it's actually with SW. being the star of the movie. And I believe I have to say that the sixth floor guest was Hitchcock, the famous director. Paul seems to have secured himself a role in a movie, while Marcella and Anne and Michael take the train to California. And there's a beautiful scene of the three of them enjoying their company on the beach. The hotel's management, I believe, goes back to Raymond, and it seems that Hotel Clarington is under better management. Beth is working in a bar, and I think it's the White Cat, while Sophie is in jail. But she then leaves the jail, and then we see a cute picture of Beth and Sophie kissing outside, very proudly displaying their love for each other. And with that, our ending credits roll in. Now, I have a lot to say. In my first playthrough, I did not know that leaving everything behind would result in the worst ending ever, even for Sophie. I think it's only Beth that gets the good ending, but the other characters all got a bad ending. Michael is taken away from Anne and is with his dad. Marcella and Anne are in jail, and Paul is in jail. And SW is never caught for the crime. If you choose to quit the hotel, Sophie will be swimming in debt, but still will be happy with Beth. So I had to go back and fix this. Oh God, this video took so much time. This is my first time editing a long form video, and I have to say, it took 1 week. I honestly don't know if I'll do this again, but if you guys liked it, I do stream on Twitch. I would love to play more games like this. I know I have some games on my bucket list right now, and I would love to have a community that enjoys these kind of games. I enjoy games that have choices, I enjoy horror games, and I think this game is really, really good. Like, I haven't really had much fun playing a game and exploring and investigating as much as in this one. It kind of reminded me of The Walking Dead, Life is Strange, which are all games that I really want to replay, because when I played those, I was probably like 15 or 16, and now I'm 27. Different perspectives. But if you guys would love to see more, or if you have a discussion that you guys would like to talk about, please let's do it in the comments. I would love to discuss this game with someone. I really, really love the game, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of things that I missed and a lot of mistakes that I did. I am very sorry, and I also would like to apologize for my speaking. It was really, really hard to read off a script. I tried not to, but sometimes I fumbled everything I said, so I had to write it down. And I think that's it for me. So I will see you guys in another video, I hope, or in my Twitch. Please come and say hi and give me a follow. I'm very close to affiliate. It would mean the world to me. Bye.